Good evening, my name is Vicki Briarcheck. I live in Canton, Ohio. I've been in education for over 30 years. I got into education because I have a younger sister who was struggling in school. Back in the late 60s, my parents were told that she should be in a developmentally delayed class. They wanted to know, my mother was a nurse and she felt my sister was not developmentally delayed, and they wanted to know what her IQ was, and the school said, well, you know, parents really can't understand that. And my parents were pretty angry. This was a long time ago, we don't do that anymore. My parents were very angry. They went and had her privately tested. They found out that she had a 135 IQ, which was close to gifted range. They didn't think she needed to be in the developmentally handicapped class. What that did to me was, when I began in education, I made a vow I would never, never forget that the people who know their children the best are the parents. And I think that I've kept that mantra throughout my career. I've substituted, I've been a teacher, I've been a gifted coordinator, and I finished my career 2 years ago as an assistant principal. I love being in education. I love being an educator. I'm proud of what we do. I'm proud of our public schools. No matter what the politicians throw, my gosh, we get the job done. We do what's asked of us, and we do it well. When the whole accountability business began, you know, I was really not against it. I felt that as educators, we had to show that we were doing the job. But things have gotten out of hand, and I think at this point we have accountability gone amok, and that really is what motivated me to start this. Thank you.
Next, we'll turn to Debbie Phillips.
Thank you, Ellsworth, and I want to thank the Athens County League for hosting this candidate forum and for folks coming out and showing an interest in this. I also want to thank the other folks up here on the stage. I think it's great that we have a lot of people who are interested in public service and care about public education. So it's kind of exciting that we have a lot of people running for a position like this. I'm currently serving as state representative for the 94th House District, and one of the things I'm not sure if I've mentioned in previous forums here in the community is one of the reasons that I really decided to get more into this work. I had been involved at the nonprofit level working for school funding equity and reform, and I had been working with many students and parents and teachers to get people involved in the debates going on at the State House about the right way to fund public education in Ohio. And there really was a moment that deepened my commitment to getting involved directly in this policy work. And that was one of the times that we took students in to testify about school funding during the state budget process. A 15-year-old girl from Western Washington County came in and she testified about the fact that her school was facing cuts. They were going to be losing many of their elective classes. And she had looked at their budget and the amount of money they were trying to save, and she had looked at how much her district was losing to online charter schools, and those amounts of money were very similar. So it was her analysis that this was hurting her schools, and she was treated badly by the legislators who were in there. And for me, that was a moment of really recognizing that we need people in public office who want to listen to the people who are affected by their decisions. I care deeply about public education. I've served on the education committee the whole time I've been in the House, and I would love the opportunity to keep working on education policy here in Ohio on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Now we'll turn to Nancy Hollister.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Hollister, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And thank the League for putting this event together. This is extremely important for public education, and because education is one of the most important topics we have. In fact, our children are our greatest natural resource. They are our present, and they are our future. And that's one of the reasons I accepted the appointment to the vacancy in District 8, and why I am running for the last 2 years. I'm the mother of five very different children, of very different levels. They keep you jumping, they're pretty exciting. And a husband who served over 12 years on the Marietta City School Board, involved in education very deeply. But even more than that, as an overarching view of this district, which covers over 13 counties in Southeast Ohio, we have no voice on the State Board of Education. We must speak out. Because of our poverty levels, if you look at any data, anything on the State Board of Education, we are dead last in everything. And we have no voice. South of 70 was kind of a battle cry at the Board of Education meeting the last couple of days, because we need to stand up and say, yes, we can, we are doing it, and we will get it done. The State Department of Education is comprised of over 500 souls, and it's led by the superintendent of instruction. And that is the board's responsibility to supervise that, as well as deal with all the legislation that comes from the legislature with education. We do not appropriate money, we do not make laws. We shape them, we polish them, we put public policy into practice as dictated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll turn to Kathleen Purdy.
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Purdy, and I'm here to tell you why every student deserves a chance. So make Purdy your chance. My birth order has offered me a wide range of experiences and opportunities that help me excel in and outside of the classroom. I especially would like to thank Athens County, because in 2014, I'm the only candidate here that ran for this seat, and I won Athens County. I won by 44.83%. And I'm asking you to make sure that I can come in and be the person that's not a career politician, but a career educator. See, being the 5th out of 7 children, neither one of my parents graduated high school or junior high school. Or my father was the oldest son from 14 children. He was a sharecropper's son, and his education stopped in 4th grade. But that didn't stop he and my mom from making sure that we got the best education that we could. Watching my 4 older siblings helped prepare me for what to do and what not to do. So I wasn't in trouble too often. And in fact, my parents did not send me to kindergarten. And the next year, I kept bugging them, when can I start school? When I started school, it was 1st grade. Fell in love with my 1st grade teacher, because she made sure each one of us learned, but also knew that we were important. Mrs. Schellenberger was so nice that once I was teaching for about 12 years, my brother and I had a chance to visit her. She was 90 years old. We asked her, why were you so nice back in that time? And she said, because she grew up in Virginia with her grandparents, and they were conductors on the Underground Railroad. And that's when she found that brown-skinned people deserve a chance as well. And I believe every child deserves a chance. So thank you, Athens County.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now let's turn to questions from the news media. And this first round will be answered in the same order we just had. And so first we'll call upon Susan Devin of WOUV. Susan?
Thank you. I wanted to know, we live in obviously a little bit of a rural area. Agriculture is a big thing here. Trade schools are a large part of our education. So what would you do on the board to prepare our students for not the traditional 4-year education in a university, maybe a trade school, maybe 2-year education? What would you do to prepare them for that?
Okay, first of all, reading. And the reason I say that, one of the things that's really interesting, that manuals, technical manuals, in order to do a hands-on sort of work in a career tech prep program, they are often at or above college level. You need to have strong reading skills in order to be successful in those kinds of jobs, be able to read the manuals, to run the machinery, to do those kinds of things. And I found that out from being very close with the career tech prep director at the school district from which I retired. So that would be my first thing. The other thing is, I think that we need to make sure that they have the good problem-solving skills. So that would be another thing, that, you know, you're not always going to, the answer's not just going to be there staring at you. It's not maybe one right answer. There may be several right answers. So giving them opportunities to do things like Rube Goldberg machines, which are fun, that kind of thing gives them problem-solving skills. Reading and problem-solving skills would be the two things I would want to prepare those students.
Debbie?
Thank you. I really appreciate that thoughtful question. You know, I think there are a lot of things that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about preparing students for success for college and for careers. And I think obviously reading is critically important, math is critically important, but I think we need to look at what has been put in place with changes to the graduation requirements. I have heard a lot of concerns from superintendents throughout the district that I've been meeting with about the way the new graduation requirements are setting students up to where they may not achieve the points they need to be able to graduate. So we need to be looking at the different pathways to graduation and make sure that students are going to be successful in graduating from high school. And we need to work with businesses in local communities, because what some businesses are saying is that students may come out with a lot of the academic skills that they need, but they may be lacking in some of the soft skills. So problem solving, being on time, dressing appropriately for work, all of those things are things that, particularly with the opiate epidemic and the loss of family structure and support for a lot of students, we need to make sure that students have the skills they need to be successful, whether they are pursuing further education or heading straight to the workforce. We need to make sure they've got the support they need to be able to be effective in getting and finding a good job in our communities.
Thank you. Next, Nancy?
Thank you. Career and technical education is one of the most important components in our future, because 21st century education is about using your hands and your mind. And if you look at one of our finest attributes that we have in this region, that is career, technical, and vocational education. It's absolutely incredible. And it's something we don't talk enough about. And it's something that I feel very, very proud of, because all of the elements that everybody's talked about are included in that education. There's a focus on what do you want to do. Is it welding? Is it carpentry? Is it electricity? And combining it with virtual reality, with computers, with learning how to do CAD programs and design programs. These things are in place now. We need to make sure they stay in place. One of the pathways to graduation in this state is called Work Keys, and it applies to career, technical, and vocational education, and it is up for review, and it certainly needs a review. That is something superintendents have been talking to me about. That's critically important that we review this. Career, vocational, and technical education is very much a part of our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathleen?
An excellent question. A couple days ago, I was at the United Steelworkers meeting, and one of the workers asked me about would I stress vocational ed, and I said absolutely, because as I sit here, a honored, award-winning, who's who among Americans teachers, and this is, I agree with you, Nancy, this is an issue that has been taking place for a while, because when I was in high school, I had like a dual major. I was in business office education, as well as some college prep classes. I knew I had to learn clerical because I had to go to work. And I worked my way through school, Kent State, started when it was $40. Full-time for books. 16 years later, my parents and my husband, 2 children, watched me walk across the stage with my bachelor's degree. And I started teaching immediately, and then I went back for my master's. My children are 39 and 40. And what did I stress to them? I said, you're going to do vocational and you're going to do college prep, because we can't dictate what skills students need, but we want them to be ready for whatever opportunities that are out there. Will it work? I'm an example. It does work. And all of my 6 other siblings, it works. So I think it would be something that I would really stress and use myself as the example. It worked then, and it will work in the future. Excellent question.
Thank you, Kathleen. And the order for the next question will be Kathleen, Vicki, Debbie, and Nancy. And I want to express my thanks to all four of you for abiding by our time limits. We do that here, and I chuckle because every now and then we have to have someone run on about 11 seconds, and so I snip them off. And I thank you for your courtesy because, well, we appreciate it and thank you. And so the next question will be asked by David DeWitt of the Athens News. David?
Thank you, Ellsworth. Numerous studies have shown that the biggest achievement gap in education is directly tied to poverty. 83% of Ohio schools have more than 18% poverty. 524 school districts have more than 18% poverty. Not one district with more than 18% poverty received an A on indicators met in the most recent round of school report cards. None of the 100 poorest school districts by poverty evaluation received above a D or an F in indicators met. So my question is two parts. Are the current school report cards an adequate and fair evaluation system for Ohio schools and school districts? And what can Ohio be doing to bridge the poverty achievement gap in education?
Another excellent question. With my parents' education, I can tell you what it's like growing up without a lot of money. We know that Youngstown is part of District 8, the poorest city in Ohio. People are poor, not because they want to be poor, but there are some barriers and there are some obstacles. And I personally think that politics has a lot to do with it. When I say every student deserves a chance, I believe that. Will they get that chance? No, because poverty is not going to go away until we stop getting career politicians in place to make these decisions, to tell parents that they don't have a choice, and come back to communities and rebuild where they have left schools with failing grades. I believe it's a tactic to make public schools seem as if the teachers aren't teaching and aren't working for an opportunity to make it into a private entity. We need people to stand up, not sit down, but stand up and say, poverty is not going to go away until we can reach our children, and we can only reach our children when we decide that not your child, but my child and everyone's child deserves a chance. I had an opportunity to read where some people running for office are saying, I just want my children and grandchildren to be successful. I want all of our children to be successful. Thank you.
This is a great, timely question for me. I just spent 2 days at the conference for the Ohio Association for Gifted Children. And you might think, well, what in the world does that have to do with poverty? But our keynote speaker yesterday spoke to us about the excellence gap. And what he maintained is that we can and should be we were missing many, many bright children. They're not all gifted, but they're bright children. And because we don't recognize that and attend to it early, we get this big gap that goes on and on and on and gets bigger as we go. I am real concerned about the current report card, about whether it truly reflects what is going on. But I will say this, that this speaker told us that what we need to do is we need to recognize quickly our bright kids and then give them access quickly to keep them engaged. When we don't keep them engaged, we tend to lose them. And when we lose them, it's very, very difficult to get them back. I would really hope that we can do that and that we can align things vertically so that kids can take a test and move on.
Thank you. That's a great question and one that we could talk about for a long time, I'm sure. I want to start by saying that I voted against the changes to the report card. I think that the way the report card is designed right now, it is set up to make schools look bad. I just think that there's no way when you are taking 3 different tests that have been administered over the course of the last 3 years and trying to say you've measured some kind of progress in how the students are doing when it's a different test that's being given, that's just an outrageous thing to pretend. It's fine to have high standards and to set a bar, but there needs to be some consistency so that schools know what they are working toward and have an opportunity to help kids get there instead of having it moved around all the time. So the report cards need a lot of work. I hope that we can build better communication with the board and legislators because that overall framework does get set by the legislature. And I hope that we can get them listening to local educators and people who are in the field better to work on that. As far as how we close the gaps, funding matters. It is not everything, but it matters if we can have small classes in the early grades. It matters if we can have assignments that are meaningful so that when students read literature, they write a paper and the teacher has time to grade the papers rather than creating a poster because the teacher has so many students that they see in the course of a day, they don't have time to grade actual writing. So it does matter. We need to solve the funding equity problem if we're going to close achievement gaps.
Thank you. The report card, in my estimation as a board member, does not reflect the success and the achievement of the school districts. It really doesn't. What it does reflect is a new set of standards that was put in place 6 years ago, a model curriculum that was put in place in 2011, and also that now you're going to get tested on it. And we changed the bar so many times that Debbie's correct. The work with the legislature is so important. And Senator Lerner and Representative Brenner, the respective chairs of Education Committee in the House and Senate, were very much a part of the discussion today and things that we need to do. We can't tolerate that. You lose any validity whatsoever when 3/4 of the state gets an F. We have a lot of work to do, both as a legislature, as communities, and as people. Poverty has been with us forever. We have success. We have an ongoing hill to climb. ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds, has funding available for after-school and preschool programs that are absolutely fantastic. We need to do everything we can. We need to identify more talented and gifted using what they call local norms, cultural differences, and identifying some of these children and applying it to them. Thank you. I could go on and on too.
Thanks to all of you. And so now the next question, we will have Nancy, Kathleen, Vicki, and Debbie in that order. And we will turn to Sarah Brumfield, the Athens Messenger. Sarah?
Thanks. District 8 represents a large portion of the eastern part of the state. And with all those districts, how will you accurately represent them as they're facing various challenges?
It's me, and I'm threes first? Okay, sorry. I'm sorry, when you were saying the eastern part of the state, the various challenges?
Yeah, how will you represent all these districts that have various, different challenges?
You have incredible folks that are part of educational service centers. You have all sorts of associations. They are very active in the entire district, in the entire state. You do that by attending the meetings, by listening, by hearing what's being said, by going to community events. It is a job that you put a lot of miles on your car. And you spend a lot of time listening to folks and superintendents. You take that information back, you absorb it. You apply it to programs like the $200,000 grants for before school, after school with the ESSA funds. You apply it toward what is a local norm and can we do more for our talented and gifted. You apply it to career and vocational education in saying, are there special talents that we can market and talk about in this state? Every single county gets represented, and the way you get to them in the most efficient way is to go to the meetings from the Educational Service Centers, sorry, it's alphabet soup sometimes, and listening to what people have to say, and then taking those thoughts and putting them into practice.
Would you repeat the question for me, please?
Sure. With District 8 spanning much of the eastern portion of the state, how do you plan on representing all the various districts who face different challenges?
Thank you. For the last probably 20 years, I have represented most of like 6 counties, and right now I'm representing at a state level retired teachers in 6 counties. I always ask number one question, and that would be, do you know who's representing you now? And they don't know. You won't have to wait for me to come find you, or you won't have to come and find me. I will be accessible. A lot of people have asked me, you know, it's a long ways down to Athens, and I said, sometimes from Alliance, I live in Stark County, I actually was driving to Columbus every week after teaching during the day. It's my hope to expand. Again, I like the idea with the UniServe offices and all of your associations, but there has to be some way in which I can reach you. My contact area, information is going to always be available. I'm retired. I retired 6 years ago, but I haven't given up on advocating for students. So you call, I'll be here. This is a 6-hour round trip for me to come down here. Do I look tired? I shouldn't. And I was out last night till 9 o'clock with teachers, listening to teachers from 6 counties as they were talking about some of the struggles that they are having. So I will be accessible. Kathleen Purdy will be there, and that's why I'm back this year running for the 2016 election.
From the first time I looked at the map and saw all the counties that were involved in this district, I've been thinking about this question. I do believe personal visits are important, but there are also different groups of people you need to stay in contact with. So I've been thinking a lot about how to do this. I would definitely work through the educational service centers, but it's not just the superintendents. I would like to talk to superintendents. I would like to be in contact with principals. I'd like to be in contact with parent groups. I'd like to be in contact with the teachers associations. So yes, there'll be times when there'll be personal visits, but there'll also be things, for instance, I thought about maybe I could set up a Google Doc where I could, before we have a state board meeting, I could say, okay, the email list of all these parent groups. I would say, I'm going down to the state board meeting. Here are some things that are upcoming. What questions do you have? What needs do you have? And then I might contact another group of principals and say, listen, this is what we talked about. How would that look when it comes to your building? How would that affect you? So that I have some input to take back to the state board meeting and say, okay, listen to what the principals say this is going to do. So I have really come up with some ideas where we could discuss things with electronically to overcome that geographical burden, or it's not really a burden, but obstacle to communication. But we can do this. I know we can, and I think we can have good communication.
Thank you. The State House district that I currently represent has 4 counties, parts of 4 counties in the district, and you know, people in the district are not always of the same opinion on issues that we're facing in the legislature. So I've worked really hard as a state representative to be accessible to people. I've held a lot of roundtable discussions in each of the counties in the district. I've also conducted periodic listening tours where I go to a lot of the smaller towns that may not often have someone show up. And I started thinking about how to do this in a state board district which contains more than 60 school districts that are largely within the state board district. And I have started traveling around to meet with educators. So What I like about face-to-face discussions is you can really get into a more in-depth discussion about how things are really working in local communities and have an opportunity to hear what's going well. What can I tell other people about that you're doing here that's a success? Those discussions are great. It is going to be crucially important that we use technology to have regular communication when things are happening quickly. So I think it's going to take a balance of those face-to-face discussions. One of the communities I visited, they had the superintendent, the principals, some classroom teachers, and the local police chief in the meeting. That's the kind of a discussion that's incredibly valuable and we need to keep having.
Thank you all. Now we'll turn to questions from you audience members, and the order of answering here will be Debbie, Nancy, Kathleen, and Vicki. I'll read this out, and if you'd like to have me repeat it anytime, any one of you, just say so, and I certainly shall. Okay, and we're going to refer to it, this is going to say the board, the State Board of Education. What might the board do to make the legislature provide adequate funding to our public schools? And then at the bottom goes ahead and underlines to be in compliance with the court order to do so.
Thanks for that excellent question. I really think that the board can do a couple things. One, obviously the board deals with implementation of policies that are passed legislatively, but I think that we can be advocates for the communities we represent. I think that we can help facilitate communication between educators and lawmakers, and I think that we really, really need to have that. I've been working for a long time on school funding reform, and there have been moments where there has been an opportunity for real progress, and that isn't a strictly partisan issue either. There was a point in time when Larry Householder brought forth a plan that would have made big changes in school funding, and there was a time when Ted Strickland did so. And last General Assembly, the House did great work with Howard Fleeter, who works for the education organizations, but the Senate then undid a lot of the work we did. So it's a question of keeping that communication going and making sure that people are engaged through the whole process. So that would be my hope for the state board, is to help facilitate communication, help educators be engaged in that process. And because I've got a lot of good relationships, even deep in the minority, I've been able to get a bill passed. I think that that is something that's valuable, that we'd be able to keep working on those larger questions. But it's going to take a lot of people getting involved. So I would only, I think, be able to help foster that communication, help people learn how to be engaged in the process so we can make those changes.
Was it Debbie, Kathleen, Nancy, and Vicki?
No, I'm last.
It's Nancy.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And you know what, Debbie and I come from the same place on this issue. School funding is a never-ending conversation. And it needs to be had intelligently, and people need to listen. And it's a conversation that needs to continue all the time, constantly. Too often, legislators or citizens walk away from the subject. As a State Board of Education member, you have no appropriation authority. You do not pass legislation. But you have members of the legislature at your meetings, and that conversation, and I also spent time in the legislature, and those conversations and those relationships are very, very important. The other side of this, as a State Board member, I voted today in favor of sending the DOE budget to the governor's office. Now, it won't look like it does now. It never does. However, it was a beginning, and it was thorough. And we had the opportunity to address issues like preschool funding and to request additional funding so we could help districts. Also to support transportation issues, which are huge issues in rural counties. These are things that we can do as board members to impact the conversation on what qualifies as adequate school funding. Thank you.
Excellent question. I started teaching in 1986, joined the teachers union. By the 1990s, I not only was leading over 8,000 members, But we are also going down to the legislation, and we were having what we call lobby days. And I didn't believe it at the time, but one of the legislators said twice they've ruled that how we fund our schools is unconstitutional. You're wasting your time. And I thought, no, I still believe that they're going to do this. 4 times we've ruled how we fund our schools is unconstitutional. I personally believe that as long as someone's being paid, getting their paycheck for not doing their job, they're not going to get it done. It wasn't until about 8 years ago that as a teacher, we even were aware of what the state school board members did. And that was because they had us to have background checks and fingerprinting checks and said, you're going to pay for it and you need to do it within 6 weeks or we're going to hold your paycheck. Well, that got our attention. I think that once citizens start to stand up and stop taking no for an answer and decide that these are our dollars, these are our communities, and as a state school board member, I'm not locked in anybody's pocket. I'm not part of anyone's cash flow. I won't collapse under the consensus. I will be your voice, and I will make sure that what we say is going to have some merit. Excellent question. Thank you.
Yeah, we keep having conversations. The conversations, they're not changing anything. And it just seems to me, we feel like as educators that we just kind of are bobbing along, and when the waves blow this way, we bob along that way, and then when the administration changes, we bob along a different way. I will agree that we do need to get all of you involved in putting the pressure. And I certainly agree with Debbie when she says, what we can do at the state board is try to foster the need, to show the need, so that if we're doing all this communicating from the last question, that we can take that information and say, yes, but look what happens because of this law. Look what happens, what it really does cost a district to do this. We need to take that information and we need to help be that liaison between the legislators and the districts. I really am rather tired of conversations. We need some action. I'm not sure how much the state board can do, but by gosh, whatever is in our power, if I'm there, I can assure you I'm going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's turn to the next question, and this will go back to the original order, so it will be Vicki, Debbie, Nancy, Kathleen, just to reaffirm that. So here's the question. Standardized tests are impacting how teachers teach. Are you in favor of these exams, or how may you change what is currently in place?
Oh boy. We need some sort of measure. As taxpayers, I do think you deserve to know whether or not we're getting the job done. But the last year I taught, we had more than 21 days of testing. That's not necessary. Not to mention the hours we spent training the students how to use the computer to take the test. And I have some reservations about tying test scores to teachers' evaluations. Now, I want to tell you, it can be in the teacher's benefit to have those scores tied to their evaluation. But we need to at least minimize it. My little saying that I've been using during this campaign is it's accountability gone amok. And that's what I really feel. Of course you need to know if we're doing our job. And I don't blame you for that. But not to the point that it changes the relationship between students and their teachers. Teachers are so nervous, so worried about whether or not their students are going to perform, that they are not taking the time to build those beautiful relationships and taking advantage of those teachable moments. So we need to scale back, but we also need to provide all of you as taxpayers with some reassurance that we are indeed doing the job that you've hired us to do.
Great question. I believe that our kids need more teaching and less testing. With the changes in federal law, I think we have an opportunity to make some changes. We are still required under the Every Student Succeeds Act to test in certain subjects in certain grades, but Ohio is doing more testing than is federally required. So again, this would require working with the legislature, but as I've been talking with people traveling around the district, I heard from one superintendent that if you are a third grader at risk of not passing the literacy test for the third grade reading guarantee, you're taking 11 standardized tests. This is going to kill any potential interest or joy in learning for this child if they feel like they're being told over and over again that they're doing it wrong and we're worried about them. So we need to have some measures that are in place, but we need to use data in a way that helps drive instruction where it's needed. We need to use data that informs the teacher about where kids need help so they can provide the help that's needed. We can have some accountability, but we don't need the amount of testing that's going on, and we need to be mindful of the way data is used. The way it's being used now, I'm afraid it really invites the kind of gaming of the system that we've seen in some of the scandals in recent years, both in Ohio and in some other states, when the tests are so high stakes. So we've got to get smarter about the way we use data and make sure we leave time for inquiry-based education and project-based learning and the things that are going to get kids excited about learning and what it means in their lives.
Thank you. Good question. In fact, the debate was held today. The debate's held every time there's a Board of Education meeting. The concept, the question is asked whether someone is giving testimony or it's from one of us. Why are we doing what we are doing? We will continue to have standardized tests. There will continue to be a check and balance system, and it is flawed to a certain point. Where I think we can have an impact on testing is to continue the discussion about how many tests we give. When we focus on graduation points that are based on end of course tests. So you can take algebra, you can get a C, you can get a B. But if you don't test right, at the end of the course, you get 0 points, you get 1 point. So accumulating your 18 points to graduation is extraordinarily difficult. There's a disconnect there that was heavily discussed today as something we need to look at. The third grade guarantee, which was Debbie just mentioned, the third grade proficiency guarantee for the cut scores was brought up today. And the recommendation was to move it to 44. I voted against it. I voted to keep it where it is because we don't have the data. And we are going to have a lot more third graders fail if it goes to 44. I lost that conversation. It will be had again.
I agree 100% with what my colleagues have said. When I started teaching, and for 20 years I taught at Pleasant View School for the Arts, we had the most gifted children, and we had children that were gifted but not academically, but in the arts. And the time came in which we would have tests, and our students excelled very well. We had children that were in the housing project area, and some of my students that I had, their parents were both surgeons. I had 2 federal judges' children in my class. So we had a lot of diversity. But our children love learning. But before I retired in 2010, with the over-reliance of tests, I saw these children, because now I was down to child number 5 and some of the families. I saw the results, and they were crucial, and they were crushing for these children. And then we got information that the testing companies were making billions of dollars off of Ohio. And so it became that economic measure. We're going to blame the teachers. We're going to dismantle public education as we know it, but yet still keep relying on these testing. I agree, we do need to know where our children stand. It's good for us as educators. My master's degree is in curriculum instruction, but we can't take away the joy from learning. And so we have to be vigilant and make sure that the legislators don't start telling us what to do and what's best for our children. Thank you.
Thanks all of you. For the next question, the order will be Kathleen, Vicki, Debbie, Nancy, and here's the question. Public schools continue to get less funding from the state, yet the state passes on more requirements such as computer standardized exams. How do you plan to help local schools fill the gap?
I've been in conversation with a lot of superintendents, and also we can't forget about local government. I live in Marlington School District. We have 3 townships, and I'm a regular visitor to the townships. Why? Because I'm a lifelong learner. Sometimes I'm there and they'll ask me, are you running for something? I said, no, I just like to know what's going on in the townships. I think it's very, very, very important that we make sure that, and I believe I just lost my train of thought, Mr. Ellsworth.
I'm sorry, I was reading the next question. I wasn't listening. Pardon me, Kathleen. You asked me a question?
Yes, the question.
Read the question again now.
Quickly.
Public schools continue to get less funding from the state, yet the state passes on more requirements such as computer standardized exams. How do you plan to help local schools fill the gap?
Okay, thank you. And a few seconds I have left. At the township trustees meeting, and I talked to a trustee last night, they're saying that we need to make sure that we have enough money in Marlington School District to properly educate our children. I came from a kind of mid-high 20 years of teaching and a high income level, and now those superintendents are saying that they're just like Canton City. They're struggling for every dollar, and they want to make sure that they have enough funding to adequately prepare the children for the 21st century. Thank you.
I don't want to sound flippant, but it would be nice if many districts in our District 8, school districts within District 8, could have the money they have to spend on charter schools back in their funds so that they would be able to use that money to meet these expectations that we have from the state level. It is something I just can't wrap my head around, how the districts not only have to send the money with the child to the charter school, which even if I don't like that, I can see the fairness of, but in addition to that, they have to send the additional money that the state promised the charter school they would get for each child. There's something wrong about that, so that might be one way to do this. I think that when we have a mandate, that there needs to be some sort of state support to support that mandate so that districts don't find it an undue burden. Yes, your local taxes, you need to support your schools, but at the same time, things keep coming down, and there's never a dime or a dollar attached to them. And it really is a hardship because then things that really make a difference, all those cool problem solving and all those other things, the funds aren't there to do those things because we're meeting the mandates.
Thank you. I think I first started working on school funding when I was in middle school and got pressed into service working on levies, phone banking, and stuffing envelopes. So, this is an ongoing struggle. As a legislator, I've worked to make sure that things I supported don't put unfunded mandates on schools. With the safety drills bill, you're able to swap out some of the fire drills to be able to add safety drills to try to work with local educators to make sure it's not increasing the burden. I have got to echo something that Vicki just said. I think one of the key factors is what's going on with charter schools and the utter lack of accountability for these schools that are draining money from our local public schools. If you look at any school district's form that does the calculation of how much state money they get, you will see the deductions for transfers out and how much money is being taken away from our local schools to go to online charter schools. Most of them are atrocious academically. They will not even tell their own board members how they spend the money. They've gone to court to fight against any effort to look at their books and where they're spending our tax dollars, and it is millions and millions of dollars being being taken away from local public education. So I do think we have an opportunity to hold these charter schools accountable. We passed House Bill 2. It's not a perfect process, but it is a step in the right direction. The online schools have been trying to get out from under those new provisions ever since it passed, and I think that as a board member, it would be incredibly important to fight to make sure that we hold them to those accountability standards and start clawing back the money they're taking away from our kids.
Thank you. One of the most difficult things that I had to look at as a state school board member, as a mom, as a former elected official, was that what Ohio's system is available now for educational choices is happening nationwide. No longer is it just about public schools. It's about community schools, charter schools, online schools. It is about school choice. You can move from one district to another. It's about going to college and getting college credits. It's any student who leaves their home high school and goes to the career center. The money follows the student. It is a very, very tough system. It's a tough environment out there for your local school districts and your local school boards, because they need their population, their student population is constantly fluid. It's a really tough situation. And I think one of my most important things is, to me, that if you receive public funding for education, everyone abides by the same rules.
Okay, we're ready for another question, and you've probably got the order down pat now, have you, everybody, or shall I? This one will be, let's see, Nancy, it'll be Nancy, Kathleen, Vicki, Debbie. So, here's the question, and this is referring to the Youngstown City School District. In Youngstown, a chief executive officer was appointed at a salary of $160,000 this year to exercise complete operational, managerial, and instructional control of the district with powers and duties to modify policies and procedure established by their elected school board, among other powers. Should this be a concern to taxpayers?
This is part of state law. Youngstown City School is an emergency situation, and my understanding from the announcement of the board that they have a new person who is now in charge, and they're very hopeful that things are going to start coming together and they have more input from the community. But the Department of Education must follow state laws with a fiscal emergency by any school district in the state of Ohio. There are numerous steps to follow. It's very unfortunate, but it is a legal reality.
Debbie's keeping us straight up here. Taxpayers should be concerned. With House Bill 70, sometimes called the Youngstown Plan, it allows for a CEO to come in with no educational background and take state money to fire the elected school board that's been elected by the community. And that law was passed without very little input from the teachers, the community, the elected school board members. It was hashed out, and it was decided that we're going to do something because Youngstown schools have been historically in a poor poverty area. Research says there's an academic gap between poverty and achievement. And if you take teachers and educators and administrators from up in Pepper Pike and Orange County and move them to Youngstown and see what results they'll get from the children that are coming from the poorest city in the state. Taxpayers should be concerned, because if we are elected, or who you've elected to the Athens School Board, and have a CEO, a 38-year-old, but that doesn't matter, we were all 38 at one time, to come in and make that kind of money and actually say to the school board, you're going to be in an advisory position, meaning that we're going to have one meeting per month.
Unfortunately, Youngstown City Schools does have quite a reputation, many, many years, of not being successful. The problem that I'm concerned about, and as Nancy said, it is a law. So first I'm going to approach that. If it's the law, and we don't think the law is a good law, then we as citizens need to go back to the legislature and say, hey, wait a minute. I know we need to do something here, but I'm not sure this is the right way to do it. So the law can be changed. So the fact that it's a law is not the excuse for what's happening. But I also have to go back to the poverty piece that Kathleen spoke to and addressed. Study after study after study says that if you want to see which school is going to be the failing school and which school is going to be the successful school, look at the income level of the community. It is absolutely correlated. Correlated so strongly, it's incredible. I worry about bringing in somebody that you've got to be careful you don't alienate everybody. And I'm not personally acquainted with the person that was hired, but in this kind of a situation, you need to be building a coalition for success, not alienating a community.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think everyone up here said some really important things about the situation. I think one reason taxpayers need to be concerned is that while it's referred to as the Youngstown Plan, it could happen anywhere, the way the law was written. You need to understand that this was cooked up by the governor's office in private meetings that included folks from the Catholic diocese and from charter schools and from local businesses, and not one person was allowed to testify in open committee. It was amended into a bill that had been worked on for 4 years. The sponsor of the bill got a phone call the night before saying her bill was going to be amended, and they would not let her see the amendment. In committee, there were rumors that this was coming, and they would not allow Melissa Cropper to testify because the bill had not yet been amended. She was only allowed to testify on the original content of the bill. So then, once they amended it, they voted it out of committee, they voted it out of the Senate, they concurred in the House, and it all happened in less than 24 hours. This is based on those report cards that we all just talked about, how inaccurate the report cards are at measuring what's actually going on in school districts. And in that flawed accountability system, any school district that remains in those bad academic ratings for a number of years could be subject to the total takeover and privatization of the school system. So it was the worst legislative process I have ever seen, and we've got to work to get it reversed. It's not only Youngstown.
Thank you. The order for the next question will be Debbie, Nancy, Kathleen, Vicki. And here it is. The Employment First initiative mandates that schools support students with disabilities to start planning for a career beginning at age 14. Yet it seems that local schools struggle with school-to-work transitions for these students. How can the state board help?
That's a great question. I think it's really important that we be looking at the needs of all students and ways that we're going to help people have as much independence in their lives as possible. I actually have recently been involved in an IEP meeting where some of these questions were asked, and it is a really interesting conversation to have with somebody that young to start thinking about what they might want to do for a job. I think that the state, one of the things I've heard as I'm talking to superintendents is that the staff at the Department of Education in the career technical fields are enormously helpful and really provide a lot of support to school districts. So I think we need to work within the schools to make sure that They're having discussions that are really based on listening to young people and what their interests are and finding ways to help them gain the skills they need to be successful in those areas, but also working with local employers. I think here in Athens County, we've got some good examples of partnerships of supported employment where we can really deepen some of those partnerships and work better on transitions.
My mother was an educator for 35 years, and she was a guidance counselor. And I remember her saying with great enthusiasm, one of the keys to the future of young people was a variety of questions that could be asked when they were in the 7th grade, when they were in the 6th grade, when they were in the 8th grade, that gave them a path that showed them their strengths that they couldn't even see yet. She was very excited about that. And she gave it to our 2 oldest sons. And she looked at Jonathan and said, "Good Lord, you're a mad scientist. You're going to be a doctor." He is a physician, geriatric specialist. Yes, very important to me. She gave it to Jeremy. She said, "You know how to speak multiple languages." He said, "Oh, Grandma, he speaks 5 languages. He's lived all over the world." There are so many things available to the guidance office, through school psychology, through school systems, that can be put to use to help our children choose a path, as well as a number of opportunities through workforce development and higher education. Again, 21st century learning with your hands and with your mind.
I sat on the Stark County Career Advisory Board when I was in Pleasant View School. And I sat with school for the gifted. A lot of our students who were gifted were also in the special ed programs as well. And we had developed something called Passport. You don't hear that term too often when you're talking about school, but I believe with seniors and elderly, they do talk about a passport. There has to be an opportunity for students, regardless of the range of their abilities, a strong interest in something that they can do very well. I know that some of my students that I had, my oldest students now are 46 years old. And every once in a while I might see them or see their parents and they tell me how well they're doing. Sometimes they weren't the sharpest student for taking a task, but they own some of their own small businesses, and that's a plus. And I believe it's not only because of the Passport program, but because they had a teacher that sat on the advisory board and could actually help advocate for these students. I believe that at age 14, even as young as 10, I had 4th graders, and sometimes I would tell them, "I can see a future. Would you like to be a teacher?" "No, Mrs. Bird, I don't want to be a teacher, but I'd like to be a fireman." I said, "Well, you can be a fireman," and I would tell Jill, "You could be a firewoman as well." "I don't want to do that. I want to be a teacher." So you have to have that conversation very early. It's never too soon, never too early. Thank you.
I'm going to tell a story. My story is about Frank. Frank is developmentally delayed, and I love Frank, and we spent a lot of time together when I was assistant principal. Now you might think, how do you like him if you spend all that time in your office? Frank was a great kid. Frank is never going to be running for the seat on the state school board probably, okay? But Frank loves motorcycles. He can tell you every Harley, all the different styles. He can tell you, I came in and told him my husband got a new antique Triumph, and he knew, as soon as I gave him the year, he knew exactly what it was. So when Frank became 14 and we talked about careers, what our school to work career coordinator did was start to think about things Frank could do with this love that he has in motorcycles. And now Frank's in the high school. I got to go talk to a high school class about running for office, by the way, the high school developmentally delayed class. 2 hours I spent, great questions. But Frank is going to be working in a motorcycle mechanics garage. And he's not going to be the main guy, but he is so excited. That's what comes of trying to find out the interest and then figuring out with their abilities, not their disabilities, what they can do.
Thank you. Now let's go to the next question, and we're back to the original order of Vicki, Debbie, Nancy, Kathleen. So the class of 2018, currently juniors, is the first post-Ohio graduation test class. Their main graduation pathway has changed both in content, format, and method. Some have raised the alarm that up to 40% may not qualify for graduation next year, and millions of dollars have been spent. Where do you stand on state-specific graduation tests for high school?
Well, we've already touched on this topic, and we need to make some changes, and we need to make them faster. We're going to have a whole lot of kids that can't graduate, and it's kind of ridiculous. It really is. We need to go, and all of you need to contact your legislators, and you need to talk to them about giving the state board and the Department of Education the ability, the authority, because again, we can't change the law on the state board. Giving them the authority to do some grandfathering or to take a look at this and make some changes. Really, 40%, and that's true. I've heard that from the principals in the county where I work. There's a real fear. I know one principal said that he sent his child to do career tech because he felt that he knew that if they did that, they could get the points to graduate. But he really wanted his child to do a 4-year degree, but he can't let them take the college preparatory coursework because he's afraid that that child will not be able to graduate. By the way, this guy, he was a principal, and that's what he's telling his child. This has to be fixed. There's something out of whack with all of this.
Agreed. I think if you talk to any superintendent, principal, school board member, you will hear this very concern. I think that as far as state-specific graduation tests, I don't really believe that that's the best way for us to use our precious dollars in education. I like the idea of using the ACT. If you're going to have a graduation test, you need to be careful to set the cut score appropriately because not every student intends to go to college. But I think at least then, if we're paying for students to take a test, it's a test that has some meaning beyond high school. So it will help them go further in their education. But if you look at the end of course exams that are being used now, districts aren't getting any information back about exactly where students are falling short. So if they've done well in their class, they've gotten a good grade, they passed the exam in the class, and then they take the end of course exam, the districts aren't even being told which part of the work the students need to be getting more education on, right? So we don't have the information we need for those tests to be meaningful, even to drive instruction. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and I think we need to have a serious conversation in Ohio with the legislature and the board about safe harbor provisions to allow more time for a rational look at how we do this so that we aren't harming these kids on into their college and career moving forward out of high school.
Thank you. Again, pertinent conversation. I've listened and spoken to the subject in the last 2 days. Imagine yourself on an airline. Man, you are getting ready to take off. You are going down the runway, and you look out the window. They're building the runway as you're moving. It's a bit daunting. It kind of puts you back in your seat. And what I have discovered, because I asked the question, because overwhelmingly, as my fellow candidates have said, school superintendents, principals, teachers, parents saying, what are we doing with this 18 points? The Board of Education set that 18 points. I was not on there. It was an intense discussion. It was not unanimous. And the feeling was it could be catastrophic. Well, we're on the verge of that right now. There is a disconnect between the end of course exams. You have pathways to graduation now. You can take the ACT, and if you score at a certain level, you don't have to take any more tests. That'll work for a few, not for all. You can go to the Career Center and try the word keys, which are in desperate need of review. Or you can accumulate the 18 points. There is intense conversation right now on trying to give the class of 2018 a timeout as they move forward.
One of the few duties of a member of the state school board is to make recommendations, and my recommendation would be, let's hold off. When we talk about 40%, we're talking about 40% of students that's going to be adults probably in the next couple months. You're going to see the impact in your communities. When you have students that cannot graduate because of some legislative policy, you're going to see a community that's going to become dismantled. You're going to see a lot of emotional and health and mental health issues, and you're going to see revenue decrease. Anytime you have high school dropouts, because that's what this is creating, 20% is too much. When you double that and say 40%, I agree with my colleagues. We have been asleep at the switch, and I believe some of it comes from having career politicians that don't have classroom experience. I've worked with students in first grade when I student taught, and I finished with middle school, sixth grade. And I do know that a classroom teacher knows what goes on in those classrooms. That's the strongest voice you can send to the state school board. Someone that has lived it, breathed it, and has honors and recommendations to support that what I say, it does have some merit.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question then, and Kathleen, you'll start with this one, and Vicki, Debbie next. College Credit Plus is a program that allows students from the 7th to 12th grades to attend college at the district's expense. Currently, there are no firm guidelines. Students can take mathematics or they can take golf. What are your thoughts on this program and the impact on high school curriculum?
Excellent question. From my experience, I said I'm number 5 out of 7. I have 2 older brothers. And when they were going to Kent State back in 1967, 68, they had classmates that said, I'm going to swim all this semester. And I couldn't imagine wanting to be a teacher thinking, who's going to swim all of this semester? And they did, and were they successful? No, they weren't. When we think in terms of curriculum and guidance and what's at stake here, I think, folks, we just have to stand up, and we're going to have to decide that education is changing, but it shouldn't change to the point that it handcuffs a person or a student from achieving. Again, I agree with what my colleagues are saying, but what I'm appealing to you is to use that common sense. We all have that common sense. Use that common sense. Show up at your local school boards. They have public speaks. Those are your tax dollars, and ask these questions so we don't get to this particular point. But I talked to my campaign manager coming down. His son is a senior in high school, and I believe that the college credit is a plus. Don't be like me. 16 years to get my undergrad degree. I paid for it, so I'm debt-free, but they should not have to come out of college with $40,000 in debt. Thank you.
We started out with post-secondary options. I don't know if anybody here knows what that is, but that meant that when you were in high school, the district you could take a college course and the district would pay for that college course, but you had to get your own transportation there. Now, don't know how many colleges and universities are within driving distance of Athens High School, but what we found with that particular system was that it really benefited those who lived in communities very close to many colleges and universities. And it also benefited those who, again, had the money because they could provide their child with an automobile that they could drive and leave the high school and go take the class and come back to the high school. So then they came up with college credit, where you could get your college credit, a high school teacher could be accredited, and you don't have to leave the building. Now we've got some equity. But my biggest thing that I want to share with you is this is a wonderful program for families who have never had someone go to college, because you can walk out of high school almost with a first year of college completed. That is a huge boon, and it makes them feel they can be successful. That is an obtainable goal. So this is a good program, and it's benefited a lot of students.
Thanks. I do think that College Credit Plus has helped to democratize access to some higher level coursework, but there are some glitches and some problems with the way it's been set up that are making it really hard for school districts financially. So in my view, it would be reasonable to have guidelines in place about students being achieving at a certain level academically, so that they are actually seeking courses that aren't available in their high school. So in some cases, students are going and taking a class at the local college or university, which they could take at their high school. And that creates, I think, more fragmentation in the system and creates a lot of financial pressure on the district. I've also heard about some colleges that the students get the textbooks, the local school district pays for the textbook, and then the college requires the students to turn the textbook into the college bookstore, and the high school then has to go buy the book again for the next kid that takes the course. So if we're buying the book, then the school should own the book, and the next kid can use that book. So I think there are some really specific details that we've got to work out so that it's not creating all this tension between the college or university and the local school district, so that really can expand opportunities for students. Some of these kids, if they get on a college campus and can see themselves there, it's going to open worlds for them. So it's important that we get the details right so that a program like this can work.
Thank you. I do remember post-secondary options. Speaking of fact, I was in the legislature and got into some interesting debates, because to me, everybody started chasing dollars at that point in time, because the money follows the student. And I have always felt that 7th grade, in very rare circumstances, is appropriate for kids to start taking college classes, especially when you look at the social aspects of it, the maturity levels, etc. But it's been around a long time, and I think it's going to stay around. It's now called College Credit Plus. And all 5 of my kids have participated in that. One of them started college as a sophomore at Miami. Got tons of great reviews on OU and their College Credit Plus program, but it's a mixed review throughout the district from superintendents who feel that it's extraordinarily costly and that some kids are not prepared to exist in that environment. And then you have others that have been able to work contracts with school districts and do it really well, talking about transportation, talking about book costs. There's all sorts of things that different school districts are doing. It is not one size fits all.
Thank you. I think we have about time for one more question before closing statements. And by some miracle, I have precisely one more in the stack that was given to me. So just to let you know how things will proceed. So the question is, I don't believe there are any public schools who believe there should not be accountability measures of its teachers and students' performance. We have seen the rules change for schools 3 times in 3 years, resulting in poor school report cards for many districts and buildings. This results in the press perpetually reporting negative outcomes for our public schools. So here's the question. What would you do to advocate for public schools to help dispel the public perception that our teachers aren't doing a good job. And let's see, that will be Nancy, won't it?
I asked this question of someone today. How do school districts talk to their communities about a report card? Or how do we have this conversation in this debate? We all know there's disconnect. We all know that things will be massaged, polished, and changed again. But one of the things that was said to me that they have seen work and work really well is we have so many things to be proud of. We spend a lot of time angry, frustrated, and we don't celebrate our success and celebrate those kids and those teachers and our communities. And one of the things that was suggested to me that, again, that has been tried and worked is between the school boards or a group of school boards to come together and have community celebrations and talk about their successes. And that in doing so, you set a positive tone in the community, and at the same time, you're still working on trying to get the disconnects and the things worked out with the report card. Again, I think that we need to celebrate success and we need to talk more and more about it because we have a lot to celebrate.
Kathleen?
Thank you. Excellent question. I'm a regular visitor to our local school board, and I get an idea, even though I'm retired and I've been out for 6 years, but because I interact with the educational community, we have something at Arlington called Positively Marlington, and it's based on the fact that our superintendent just located his birth mother. He was adopted, he was from Pennsylvania, and he said that his birth mother only lived about 5 miles away from him at any course of time. He just turned 50 this year. Spoke to her, and she said, everything you're doing at Arlington is very positive. One of the reasons why is because we have community forums. We have community day. No charge to any of the parents. We also have community roundups. We have open meetings at our school board, and our community is starting to come together. For the last 4 years, we've had a 3-against-2 split in Marlington, and last year the board changed, and now it became a 3-2 for the no's and the what's. But you can see the cohesiveness that's come about from us celebrating the good things that are happening at Marlington. Last night at my meeting, teachers, they don't feel rewarded, they don't feel celebrated, but somehow I would advocate that they are the best person. They spend the most time in the day with your child, and they care. They're not there for the money. They're there because they care.
When those report grades came out a few weeks ago, I don't think anybody was thinking about any great feel-good celebrations that they had. It can't erase that D or that F that comes in on the press. And by the way, I'm not blaming the press. You're only reporting what's there. The only solution that I can think of is that we've got to come up with a realistic, consistent measure from which the school district can look at and say, okay, for 3 years we've had this, we're doing this, look, this went up, okay, good, let's keep making that change. And we can learn. But when the target keeps changing and the measure keeps changing, it's kind of like trying to chase Tinkerbell. You know, it flashes over here, flashes over there, but you can't get your hand wrapped around it. No matter what, the press is going to put that grade in the report in the paper. And it hurts when you get a low grade. So I think our best way to stop that and to build ourselves back up is to have data that we can depend on.
That's a great question. I think that it's gotten to the point where some people feel like the accountability measures that have been put in place are designed to try to make schools look bad. We know that schools are meeting so many more needs than they had to in the past, and I think we all see real improvements in our schools. I think that by changing the measure so many times and continuing to move the bar, it has just eroded the credibility of the Department of Education and the whole accountability system. Because people look at what's happening in their schools and they know that we've got good teachers and good stuff going on, and there's such a disconnect with these report cards. It does harm morale, but we've got to find a way to measure what's actually going on if we're going to report it this way. So the Every Student Succeeds Act does include provisions to look at some measures that are not based on test scores. So I've been asking superintendents, what would be a good way to tell the community what you're doing well in your district? What would be another measure that we could look at that would talk about the quality of education that's going on, whether that's participation in extracurriculars or service learning, or whatever we would choose to look at to try to highlight some of those positives that could actually show up on the report card. And the other thing is we've got to do a better job measuring the growth that students make. You can't take a different test each year and say that it did anything to measure growth. But if we want to talk about what's happening in the classroom and in the building, we've got to do a better job of taking kids where they are, how they come in, and what does the district do to help them move ahead. How do we measure that growth more accurately?
Thanks, all of you. I think it's time now for our closing statements. And so those will be in the order of Debbie, Nancy, Kathleen, Vicki. And so 2 minute closing statements. Debbie Phillips.
Thank you so much, Ellsworth. I want to say thank you again to the League for hosting this forum. This has been the only opportunity that we've all had to sit down and have a really in-depth discussion about the issues, and I think it's really helpful for the voters to get a chance to hear where we stand on things and how we talk about things. I believe that my experience serving on the Education Committee in the House and for the last several General Assemblies on the Finance Committee working on the school funding issues is an important asset that I would bring to this position, but also because with it comes the relationships that I've been able to develop with legislators. And we know a lot of the issues we talked about here are going to continue to be debated in that legislative forum, so we've got to build some better communication between legislators and the folks who are doing the rulemaking and the folks who are implementing policy decisions. So I hope that some of those relationships I've built in the community and within the legislature will be valuable. I'm also really proud to have the endorsement of the Ohio Democratic Party, the Ohio Education Association, and the Ohio Federation of Teachers, and hope that I will have the opportunity to represent you on the State Board of Education and keep working for our kids, our educators, and our communities. I think we've got some real strengths, and we've got to do a better job communicating that to the public and getting policy to support the good work that's going on in our schools. Thank you.
I would echo Debbie's sentiments. Ellsworth, I'd like to see you again, and thank you so much for being Master of Ceremonies tonight, as well as the League of Women Voters, and all of you who took the time to come out tonight. That is so very important. I have spent the last 4 months as a member of the Board of Education. There are 19 people, and it is a mixed lot of group, elected and appointed. I viewed the Board of Education from a distance, and I found it to be very negative a year ago. There was tremendous fighting and arguments. A lot of negative things happened, and I watched that from a distance. And it was my pleasure to be a new member of that board, to listen to the folks who had applied to be the superintendent of schools. And I think we made a unanimous, it was the first unanimous vote in a long time, of a fabulous new superintendent. Paula De Maria is a good guy. He's a listener, and he's a policy wonk, and he's a numbers guy and a data guy, and he gets it. He understands how critically important education is. And then understanding our role as Board of Education members, that we get to shape and polish public policy, that we have the difficult task of revoking teachers' licenses almost every meeting, as well as overseeing a new superintendent. I would point to my experience as a former member of the legislature And as the director of the Governor's Office of Appalachia, I know all the back roads in this district. I know how to get to one place from another. As well as 30 years involved in policy making and education. Thank you for your support and listening.
Kathleen?
Again, I am Kathleen Purdy, here to ask for your support again. As I sit here in the very first time I've been in, not your town, I've been here several times, but I have a niece that graduated from Athens High School, Emily Brown, 3 years ago. Emily's 21 years old. And she came from a single family. Her mom divorced when my nephew, when Emily was about 10 months old. Emily has done remarkably well. One reason is because of this community. Emily just spent 6 months in Europe, in France, and she's living the dream of a 21-year-old. She was in Honduras. Her mom works here at the on the OU's campus. I feel her spirit in here, and I know that so many mothers oftentimes have to make that choice as to education or going to work. It's possible. Emily is a success story. Some of my students are success stories for me. I feel that I could talk about my endorsements. I got one last night from over in Youngstown, but I want to talk about my record. Endorsements, if they're politically motivated, it's because they want a reason to keep you politically connected, and nothing's going to happen. If it doesn't pass the smell test, folks, then think about what's good for your children. I'm not talking about my children, I'm talking about your children, as well as my own children. I do have a son who's serving his 18th year in the military. He said, I didn't want to do college. He is excelling very well. He's on his 3rd deployment. My daughter always wanted to go to college. She went to college. She has 2 master's degrees. She's employed from Kent State University. And I have a 10-year-old grandson. He wants to be a soldier so he can fight the enemy. He's only 10. He's in El Paso, Texas. It's an Army base. Hopefully Grandma Purdy can get him to change his mind. Good luck to all of my candidates here. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Vicki?
My last year as an educator was probably the most difficult year I ever had. Not because personally it was difficult, but I watched the repercussions and the things that happened to our teachers and our students based on current policies. My favorite story is to tell is about a little boy who came in crying on yet another test day, and the principal said to him, what's going on? And he said, oh man, can you just make them stop? Can we not take any more tests? I'm tired. And, the 5th graders think the principals have all the power in the world. If only we did. And the principal said, buddy, I'm sorry. If I could not give this test today, I would cancel it right away. But the state needs to know how you're doing. And the little boy said, but I get good grades. Couldn't they just ask my teacher? Duh. Yeah, what a thought. So I want to leave you with that and thank you again for having us here tonight. It has been so refreshing to actually get to talk to you about what we believe. I want to join the State Board of Education because I want to be a voice for all the districts in Ohio who continue to put students first. And that they believe that public education is one of the most crucial tenets of our democracy. In the classroom, we teach values and beliefs, and on the playground, we learn that we are more alike than we are different. Thank you.
Thanks all of you. So this brings us to the conclusion of our